everyone, so for my video I'm going to be talking about cardiovascular disease and added sugars. Recently there has been a rise in the discussion surrounding the potential health side effects from added sugars. These added sugars are in many products, specifically in manufactured or processed foods. Added sugars can be unassuming in the fact that there are many foods we don't usually associate with having a sugary taste. And when consumed consistently in one's diet, they have the potential to increase one's risk of developing cardiovascular disease, also known as CVD. So for my research question, I'm going to look at how added sugars contribute to CVD. So a little overview of what exactly cardiovascular disease is. It is currently becoming a global issue which leads to many living with the chronic disease, and it contributes to many deaths yearly. CVD is a disease of the heart that affects the blood vessels in different areas in the heart. CVD can cause blood vessels to narrow, making it difficult for blood to pump to the heart and other organs in the body. And other potential problems may include issues with the heart valves and having an irregular heart rhythm. Risk factors for CVD include high blood pressure, high cholesterol, type 2 diabetes, and poor dietary choices. So, such as having a diet that is high in added sugars, sodium, and fat can all contribute to the risk of developing CVD. So currently the treatment of CVD comes in many different forms, and it typically depends upon the type of CVD the person has. So common forms of treatment include medications, procedures, and maybe one of the most influential forms of treatment comes from making lifestyle changes in terms of nutrition and physical activity. So building these prevention habits into your daily routines, such as eating foods low in added sugar, sodium, and saturated fat content, partaking in 30 to 60 minutes of exercise regularly, and avoiding habits like smoking will all help reduce the risk of one developing CVD in their lifetime or prolonging that diagnosis. So the difference between added and natural sugars is that added sugars are put into foods during manufacturing, while natural sugars are found in fruits, vegetables, and whole grains in the forms of fructose and glucose. And natural sugars may also be found in milk in the form of lactose. So this picture just depicts the difference between the added and natural sugars. So the added sugars are typically in foods such as pastries, donuts, and candies, and more processed foods, while natural sugars are typically just found in fruits and vegetables. So here are some hidden added sugars. So it may seem that it can be hard to avoid a lot of these added sugars in our foods in the US because they're in a lot more foods than we initially think. So just because something doesn't have the connotation of being sweet, it may still contain added sugars. For instance, salad dressings contain added sugars and even jarred pasta sauce. Some food items based on the packaging give the consumer the preconceived notion that it is a healthy item. But with further looking at the nutrition label, it can actually be packed with added sugars. And this is commonly found with some cereals like granola or even protein bars. So some of the images just show here with further looking that a healthy item may actually have a lot of sugars in it. So this yogurt has 26 additional grams of added sugars, and this popular vitamin water drink has 27 grams of added sugars for the whole bottle. So some of the effects that added sugars can have on the body. So added sugars can increase inflammation levels, which over time can contribute to the development of cardiovascular disease. And high consumption of added sugars is also linked to having increased triglyceride levels. Triglycerides are a type of fat in the bloodstream. So high levels of triglycerides help with the formation of plaque in the arteries. But the buildup of plaque in the arteries is not good because it can cause narrowing of the blood vessels, making it harder for blood to flow to the heart. So this is just a close-up image of what it looks like for plaque to be building up in the arteries, and as you can see that the walls of the arteries are beginning to become narrow. So the first research study we're going to look at is how added sugars contribute to the CVD mortality rate among adults in the United States. So the main goal of the study was to look at the consumption of added sugars based on the percentage of daily calories from added sugars that adults consume, and then compare the consumption rates to cardiovascular disease mortality. So the type of study that was used here was a prospective cohort study method. So researchers for this study had a total sample size of 11,733 participants, and the sample was collected from the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey between the years of 1988 to 2006. The study consisted of completing a trend analysis of the consumption of added sugars and an association study of the sugar consumption with those with CVD. Participants in the survey participated in a physical exam and then were asked to provide a 24-hour dietary recall. These 24 dietary recalls were done periodically throughout the study, and then researchers used 2 different online databases to make sure they're getting the most accurate data on the added sugars participants in the study were consuming. And then once they had that data, a statistical analysis was performed using the data from the dietary analysis, and then participants in the study were followed, and a matching method was used to determine if there was ever a CVD diagnosis or if the cause of death was due to CVD. So this image here just shows a close-up of some of the data and statistics. So at the top, it just shows the percentage of calories that adults consumed that were from added sugars. So it was either 10%, under 10%, or more than 25%. And then on the side, it just shows some other data like age, gender, race and ethnicity, educational status, and smoking status. So in the end, researchers were able to take away that there was a significant increase in risk of cardiovascular disease mortality with high amounts of added sugars consumed in one's diet. And on average, adults in the United States are consuming 10% of their daily calories from added sugars, but some adults were found to be consuming 25% or more of their calories from added sugars. And at the end of the study, which was over a 14-year period, it shows that the amount of calories consumed from added sugars rose over 15% during that study period. So it shows that that is becoming an increasing problem in the United States. And there was a total of 831 deaths due to CVD at the end of the study. So researchers overall wanted to recommend that adults limit their intake of added sugars. And since the study was conducted over many years, it shows that added sugars have been an increasing problem in the United States and have thus been contributing to cardiovascular disease mortality for a long time. The second research study looks at how the consumption of added sugars can affect an adolescent's risk in developing CVD. So the main purpose of this study was to evaluate how the consumption of added sugars in adolescents led to an increased risk of developing cardiovascular disease later on as an adult. And then a cross-sectional study method was used for this study. So researchers evaluated data from the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey to look at a sample of adolescents between the ages of 12 and 18 from the United States. The data came from all the way from 1999 all the way up until 2004. The sample size for the study was 2,157 participants, and each participant gave a fasted blood sample. Researchers, like in the last study, also used the method of a 24-hour dietary recall for each participant, and they also checked that with the 2 national databases. The total amount of energy intake from the added sugars was able to be calculated once researchers had all the data from the 24-hour dietary recall. And then when participants had their blood drawn, their height, weight, and blood pressure were also measured. So since researchers were able to evaluate certain biomarkers such as blood work and BMI, they were able to gain a more comprehensive idea of the risk someone may be facing based on their added sugar consumption, and among other factors. So in the end, it was found that high consumption of added sugars in the diet of children and adolescents can contribute to multiple risk factors for developing CVD later on in life, such as obesity and being pre-diabetic. Another prevalent CVD risk factor found in many of the participants was that some had higher LDL levels, which is also known as the bad cholesterol. And also that added sugar should be reduced in the diets of children and adolescents. And another interesting point researchers made were that many products containing high amounts of added sugars are often marketed toward children and teens, making them want them more, such as cereals and fast food. And overall, it was concluded that there needs to be an increase in dietary guidelines pertaining to added sugars and the need to reduce the intake of them. So although getting CVD during childhood is extremely uncommon, the risk for developing it can start early on with dietary and lifestyle habits that are kept through childhood and adolescence. So like I mentioned before, the marketing towards children and teens of certain food products that are high in added sugars, I wanted to show an example of a popular cereal commercial.
Lucky Charms! Heart stars and horseshoes, clovers and blue moons, hourglasses, rainbows, rainbow, 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 rainbows!
Wow! Lucky Charms! Now there's 3 rainbows! How steep!
Now with 3 rainbows, only Lucky Charms cereal, part of a good breakfast. And Charms. You can try chocolate Lucky Charms. It's magically delicious.
So as you can see in that video, there was a lot of bright colors, there was a catchy song, and it showed a story of kids trying to get the Lucky Charms. So this commercial is all made more enticing for children and teens to want the product more.
Lucky Charms.
And then these are just a few other examples of other popular cereal brands that have enticing commercials, such as Kellogg's Frosted Flakes, Trick Cereal, and Cinnamon Toast Crunch. So the last research study we're going to look at is an animal-based study, which was on how human-relevant levels of added sugar consumption increase female mice mortality and lower male fitness in mice. So the central idea of this study was to examine how giving mice the 25% calories of added sugars that humans on average are consuming to see if the added sugars had any negative effects on the health of mice. So this was an animal-based study done in a laboratory setting. The researchers used wild-derived mice, and the study followed all of the animal care guidelines and methods set by the ethics board at the university where the study took place. The mice were then split into either the experimental or control group. So the experimental group was fed a mixture of fructose and glucose, which had about the same ratio of sugars found in processed beverages. The control group was given a mixture of cornstarch and fiber. Researchers set up 6 OPA populations, which are essentially enclosures that stimulate an actual territory. The experimental group numbers in each population were matched for the equal amount in the control group. Researchers would examine the enclosure during weekly check-ins, which went on for a total of about 34 weeks. The researchers took samples from the mice, and they did so in a manner that evaluated certain things that were associated with sugar-induced disease, such as body weight, glucose tolerance, glucose levels, and insulin levels. Researchers were then able to complete a statistical analysis when they had the data they needed. So in the end, the results of this study determined that added sugars fed to the mice decreased the survival rates for female mice, and in male mice it was found that there was a decrease in reproductive success and in competitive ability. So although this research wasn't specifically focused on the health of humans, it shows that even in mice, added sugars were seen to cause adverse health outcomes. And it encompasses an overarching idea and theme that the properties of added sugars present negative effects on the body of both humans and animals. So this graphic just shows the American Heart Association guidelines for daily added sugar consumption. So the AHA recommends that a woman consume no more than 6% of calories each day from added sugars, which is about 6 teaspoons. And for men, it is about 9 teaspoons, which is no more than 150 calories per day coming from added sugars. So added sugars don't have a nutritional value and do not benefit us in any way, and they can potentially cause for the development of adverse health outcomes. But the thing about added sugars is that it is easy to consume more than we think. Many of the added sugars people consume come from sweetened beverages such as sodas and sweetened coffees, desserts, candy, and processed foods. So for instance, a 12-ounce can of soda can have as much as 10 teaspoons of sugar, which is over the daily recommended amount for both men and women. So some of the ways to reduce added sugar intake is to check the ingredient list for common sugar names such as high fructose corn syrup, cane sugar, molasses, raw sugar, or corn sweetener. And then it is always a good idea to read the nutritional label to check for the amount of added sugars in a product. And then to limit the consumption of sweetened beverages, baked goods, and candy, and consume those in moderation. And then to just prioritize fruits and vegetables in the diet to get those natural sugars. So in conclusion, the facts and research all point towards the idea that added sugars do in fact increase the risk of developing cardiovascular disease, and that it is best to limit added sugars in the diet as much as possible, or just consume those items in moderation.